Roundhouse. I am Chris Vitali, your host. I am joined by Kevin Czerwinski, author of Can of Corn here at BallNine and author of The Bobblist, the Bubblehead blog to end all Bubblehead blogs. Kevin, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Chris. How you guys doing?
Good. And we are happy to say hello to a new guest. Mike Acosta is with us. He's the former historian and authenticator for the Houston Astros and team historian. Now heading up on the board, I believe you said, of the Astrodome Conservancy.
Yes.
Now the Astrodome Conservancy we'll get into in a second, but Mike, the lead off. Don't worry about it.
That's
Mike,
right.
how you doing today, man?
Game's underway right now. I'm doing great. I appreciate having me on here. Yeah, this is awesome.
Cool, man. Cool. So,
go ahead. Talk about the Astrodome. I mean, talking to ball players who actually played in the place, they kind of hated it. So, I listened to Keith Hernandez rail about it on Met broadcasts all the time, and just saying how horrible it was and how it cost people home runs, and fielders hated it. It was like playing on cement. So, other than the nostalgic aspect of it, and I guess what the building represented, what's the idea behind preserving it, restoring it, bringing it back to life?
Well, I think first off, I want to address like the players because a lot of the players really loved it, and I heard a lot of firsthand. Now with Keith Hernandez, it's a different thing because they were in a heated rivalry, with the Astros, and so there's this level of kind of playing around. It's like, like it really to kind of get things out there in the media for them to print certain things and kind of get the fans rallied and stuff. It's funny how some players are not a certain way when they're with a certain team, but then they get into another team and they get a rivalry with a certain team, and then all of a sudden everything's wrong with where that team plays. And now the Astrodome took some home runs away, but Jimmy Wynn had no problem hitting them out there, and Jeff Bagwell had no problem hitting them out there. Glenn Davis, there was quite a few home run hitters. Now Hank Aaron back in 1967, Jimmy Wynn and Hank Aaron were in a home run race for most of that season. And Hank Aaron said, hey, if Jimmy Wynn wasn't playing in the Astrodome, that he probably would have hit. He would have been the one to hit the most home runs that season in there. Now, granted, the center field is 406. Now, in the Astrodome, what really killed the ball were the power alleys, because the original dimensions were 390. And then the fences were moved in the early 70s and a little bit more in the late 80s into the early 90s. And it became more of a 378 power alley. And then down the lines, eventually were 325. And then center field was once 406 and brought into 400. So the field conditions, the dimensions were a little bit more favorable as time went on. But early in the early years, you had to hit a home run. If you were going to hit it to right field, direct right field, or direct left field, you had to not only clear a standard 10-foot wall, but then you had to clear the next floor up and then hit it into the mezzanine level. So there was this concourse of the field boxes that wrapped around the foul pole. If you're familiar with Shea Stadium, and I think from the looks of your hat, you know that little concourse that wrapped around the foul pole. Yeah. You had to hit it into that deck of seats, and that's about I want to say that was about 20. Probably 30 some odd feet up. So it was quite a feat. And then the Astros, for the most part, didn't have a lot of power early in the early years, so it kind of worked more against the teams that were coming in than anything else. But I think it was just the gaudiness and the bravado that the stadium had, and other teams were kind of jealous of how, I know especially the media in New York couldn't believe that Houston had actually built this, and some of them probably had a chip on their shoulders because the Dodgers were trying to build a dome stadium in New York, and then Robert Moses got in the way and said, no, the highways and Queens, and we're going to put a municipal stadium and it's going to be better and quick access and all that stuff. And then they built Shea Stadium and the Dodgers left. So, I think some of them came to Houston, and I know firsthand from some people who used to work for the Astros who had relayed some of these stories to me, and part of the former ownership, where they just came in with a real big negative attitude and really just couldn't believe that this structure was built, this edifice was built in Houston, which was kind of looked on as an old cow town. But it was a transition period for Houston back then, where it was going from the old school kind of not really a small town, because it was always a big town, and it was the largest city in Texas, but it was also one of the fastest growing in the nation. And you had the oil industry, but then you also had the energy industry behind that, the medical industry, and of course the space industry too. All of that was taking off at one time, and so Houston was really kind of on the rise as far as growing. And just over the years, so people, I think they failed to understand this is the way we did it in Houston. And when you go to another stadium, if you go to Wrigley Field, if you go to Yankee Stadium or wherever it is, and you're going to expect as a ball player that you're going to have different hitting conditions. There's going to be different playing conditions. If you're going to have a wall of ivy in Chicago, you're going to have a symmetrical field in at Shea Stadium, or you're going to have the quirkiness of the difference in the Yankee Stadium. And the Astrodome was no different. It's just the only difference in the Astrodome was that it was indoors and there was really no wind. But it had the same basic dimensions, and of course, all the diamonds are all the same: 90 feet between the bases, 128 feet across the diamond. It's all the same thing. So I think that a lot of times when the players say that they hated playing in the Astrodome, it's more of just kind of a showmanship, on the part of the player, just to kind of get that type of mentality out there. But I hear a lot of good talk about the Astrodome from players who played there an extended period of time. And that's the other thing too, with some of the players who have come out negatively against the Astrodome. They really didn't. I mean, it wasn't their hometown. It was. They're not from Houston, and they probably don't care, and don't whatever. And I come in here, and this is a dump, and I can't hit here, and they go on that aspect. They take themselves out of the ball game a lot too. That's a big aspect in hitting, is you get psyched out by where you're playing. And the good players kind of really play through that and kind of adapt, even if they are experiencing something that's out of the ordinary for them. So, that being said, the Astroturf at the time where Keith Hernandez would have been visiting Houston was pretty worn out. It was about almost 10 years old, and that turf had been placed in 1978, and so during that time where the Astros and the Mets were kind of in that 86 season, and there were some heated matches, between the two teams, the turf had worn down a little bit. And earlier, I would say about 3 or 4 years prior to that, in the early 80s, the plan was to have replaced the AstroTurf. And during the decade of the 80s, the Astrodome underwent over $100 million of renovations, from new seats, new scoreboards, new turf, eventually got in there, new signage and all that stuff. I mean, the whole complex got a big upgrade and brought to modern standards in the 80s. But the turf wasn't replaced at that point. And there were some unevenness in the dirt. The floor was dirt underneath the turf at that time. And the padding was about a 1/4 inch pad. It wasn't, later on, it was more of an inch of padding once the turf was replaced, and there was a concrete floor underneath it. When they replaced the turf, they redid the floor underneath for better field transitions between football and baseball and concerts and other things. So I can see how he probably would have hated, playing on the field, because some of the players said, yeah, it was a bit tattered. They were a bit late in getting a new field at that time. But overall, the Astrodome is probably the best designed dome stadium and the friendliest one to baseball out of all the ones that were ever built. It was really built in mind with the players and the fans and the ballpark experience. And just the whole navigation around it, where things were, it was unprecedented. So later in life, people took it for granted, just like anything else.
Well, I covered the Mets for a while 20 years ago, and I had gotten to Houston after the Astros moved into the new park, and so I never got to cover a game at the Astrodome. I covered a lot of games up in Montreal at the Big O, and I'm wondering and I'm sure you've been up there. I mean, you were the team for a while, so I'm sure you probably got there at some point. Was the Astro Turf in the Dome as bad and the floor as bad as it was in Montreal? Because Montreal was literally like going out in the street and playing.
This is Astroturf from the Dome.
Oh,
see that padding?
There's
There's a pretty thick amount of padding underneath the turf, and if you look at it, it is pretty coarse, but it does have a good amount of padding underneath there. And this was called Astroturf 8. It was a new generation of Astroturf that came about in 1988. And this is the turf that I was talking about that came after those years with the Mets had passed. And it actually was very soft. That Astroturf, it had I think more than anything, the ball probably bounced a lot more off of it. I had been on the floor before when there was dirt underneath the Astroturf, and it did feel different in like 1987, 86, because I was an Astro buddy. So we used to go down to the field, and I being a baseball fan like I am, I used to really take note mentally as to how this playing field would be if I was playing on it. And when the new turf went in, it felt completely different, and it was a lot softer. It wasn't as hard as I think people would think it is. If you slide on an outfield area, the main difference between the turf and the grass wasn't really the hardness of the floor; it was the burn that you would get.
That's
from the turf.
Rug burn.
Yeah, it was more of a rug burn off of that. But as far as the hardness or softness of the playing surface was pretty similar, especially in that third generation of turf, that was put in there in the late 80s.
Interesting. Now,
so it would have been better than what Montreal had. Definitely.
I think anything would have been better than what Montreal had. And I mean, unless you're talking about Veteran Stadium in Philly, that was
that was a dump too.
Thing, which I mean, that's just like the rug is ripping up. It looked like my first apartment in Queens. Like, it's just tattered. And it's funny, you were talking about the Mets and the Astros having some heated games. I'm going to bring up one name to both of you, and I want to hear what you guys both have to say. Mike Scott, and you know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about. From a Mets perspective.
Yeah, I want both perspectives here, just because I want to. Yeah, was he scuffing?
You know what? You reap what you sow. You got rid of Mike Scott, so too bad. You should have kept him. You should have kept him, and he would have been pitching for you. You should have kept Nolan Ryan too. There you go.
No, but no, seriously, was he scuffing in that game? Like, when nobody could hit him? Like,
can I tell you?
What do you think?
Whether he was or he wasn't, I don't care. You know what? Guys have been scuffing the ball and doing that shit for 150 years.
Oh, I know.
So why should that be any different? The Mets could have done it too.
The Mets probably did do it too.
Yeah. So, you know what? How about you just hit the ball better? How about you take better swings?
There you go. Now, Mike. I think we're probably very similar in age. So you remember that 86 series against the Mets?
Yeah, it's my favorite season out of my
that
youth,
was one hell of a series. What did you guys think? Because I mean, that was intense, man. I mean, at the time the Yankees kind of stunk. So I mean, I was obviously, aside from throwing darts at a poster of Darryl Strawberry, I was kind of rooting for the Mets at that point. But I always kind of liked the Astros as well when they were in the National League. So what was your what are your memories of those teams?
That last game of that series was
intense.
Probably one of the best, if not the best baseball game I've ever seen from an excitement standpoint and an historical standpoint, all that kind of stuff. I think it's just great.
Yeah, they made a book out of it too. Yeah, did you get that copy of that book? The greatest game ever played?
I did.
Yeah, I still have mine. I love reading it. Even though the outcome is what it is, it's a great baseball story.
Yeah.
But my thoughts on the 86 season and Mike Scott, so I guess it's different now. after working in baseball for 22 years and really being up close to the action and seeing what players do and how they play and how they approach and the mental aspect of the ball game and how important that mental aspect is. The one thing that I picked up on was the frustration level that a hitter can get if they don't like the pitch, if they feel that it should not have been a strike or something along that line. And you see it on TV all the time. Oh, they shake their head and they look back and, they come back and readjust. And what that is really essentially doing, it's not showing up anybody. It's really taking yourself out of that at bat. And more than often, the hitter is going to strike out or they're going to pop out or something because they're no longer locked into that at bat. And we all know that you have less than a split second. If you have a pitcher out there, major league pitcher, and say it's a star pitcher, you have less than a split second to decide whether or not you're actually going to swing at it, and let alone where that bat is going to go through the strike zone. So you really need to stay focused. And if you are, if you are heated about, hey, we're collecting these balls that Mike Scott threw, and I'm slamming my bat. If I'm a pitcher, I used to be a pitcher when I was a lot younger, and I loved it when the hitter got emotional because that means all of his logic was gone.
Yeah,
and
got in his head.
I had him,
Yeah.
and I'm the first line of defense. So any little tactic, even if it's not true, anything that I could do with the mound presence or whatever, just to get into their head, that is what I was going for without them knowing. It was like a mind game. And so just throwing them off balance, Now, that's one thing. Okay. Now, there's three parts to this. That's the first part, the mental aspect and how a hitter approaches the at bat. The next part is the God-given talent that a pitcher has to throw a baseball and the ability to learn how to throw a certain pitch. Now, Roger Craig, who was the manager of the Giants at the time in '86, was the biggest critic outside of the Mets. He was the biggest critic of Mike Scott for scuffing the ball and being able to throw a split finger fastball. But it was Roger Craig who actually taught Mike Scott how to throw that pitch. So it was a little weird, but it really wasn't, because again, there's a level of showmanship in baseball, right? And you see, like the Tommy Lasordas, of old, like he used to come out there, and I know firsthand from talking with Alan Ashby, who used to be the catcher for the Astros, that a lot of those rivalry games that they had with the Dodgers, if something went against the Dodgers and he came out there to argue, and if you look at some of the video, you see the umpire actually sort of smiling, but he still has kind of a serious, and it's because Tommy's out there going, I know you're great and you made the right call, but damn it, I have to get these crowd up and going. And he was putting on a show. And Alan told me he just thought it was the funniest thing, but he understood what he was doing. And that's all part of the mind game in stopping the momentum of the ball game. If there was a big strikeout and, trying to get your players back into it. So there's that aspect too. Mike Scott was able to throw a split finger fastball. I mean, he had the natural ability to do it.
Whether
Roger
it was scuffed or not.
Yeah. Now the third part of it is getting into the aspect of trying to outdo your opponent. Okay. And what it takes to do that, and all the little silliness and games and little things that teams do and have always done for decades to try to get the upper hand on your opponent. And whether if it's scuffing a ball, using the soup, we've all seen this, right? The soup, that's now a little bit more under control, or if it's a toss around the infield and one of the infielders has something on their hands, and as they're doing the toss around back to the pitcher.
Mike Pagliarulo used to do that. He used to keep a tack in his glove, and when they would throw it around the infield, he would just throw it back to the pitcher. There you go. I mean,
now all of those little shenanigans. That's one thing. Now, if I was to go out there and we were in a scenario where I had some soup under my bill, or we were passing the ball around after we got somebody out, and I got somebody scratched the ball or whatever it was, and looked like it was natural, I still wouldn't be able to throw the strike that I need to. But Mike Scott could, and I don't think it really mattered. Now, we all know that what's important to ball players is the grip, right? And so so that way it doesn't fly out at the wrong, release point, or, they hurt their arm or hit the batter, and really cause injury to them. And, if you have a little extra grip on it, and that helps you to kind of throw your pitch, and again, it's nothing new, but I think that in the case of Mike Scott, who came out and threw this wonderful split finger fastball, and the guys were so frustrated, and they weren't used to that. I mean, the Mets were a winning team. That team was a well-oiled machine. They had great chemistry. They had a lot of strong personalities. And again, when the emotion and the logic come into play, the emotion was really high with the Mets, which means their logic was going down. I mean, that's a general rule of psychology. And so Mike Scott got into their heads. The Astros got into their heads, and they couldn't wrap themselves around it. But once Mike Scott was removed from the equation, and you had some other people in there who were good pitchers, they were able to make the attack that they could, and that's why they came back in that game 6 and tied it up, and then it went into extra innings.
Well, I think a big part of that game, though, when you talk about that psychology, the Mets knew that Mike Scott was looming in Game 7.
Yeah.
And
they don't want anything to do with him.
No, we need to get this done now, because we don't need that tomorrow. And I think that the effort and the energy of that series, I think that's a big reason why they lost the first 2 games of the World Series, because they were just so drained.
Yeah, and that's very true. I've seen that firsthand. I mean, baseball is exhausting. It is, because you're playing nearly every day, and then you have the travel in between. Especially a postseason series, you have maybe the day off for practice or whatever. But it really, I mean, you've already played 162 plus games just to get there, and your body has gone through even the best players in the game are going to go through injuries during the season. There's going to be an extended period, whether they make it known or not. It might be a scenario where they can play through it, but they might be sore in some, wrist, ankle, leg, whatever it is. They might be sore going in there, and then the body starts to slow down. That's what happens with the team. A lot of the teams that are out, like in the first round of the postseason, they've just shut down. And that's a lot of times you see a team that maybe went deep the year before, like the Astros, for example. We lost the 2018 LCS against the Red Sox, and I attribute that primarily to injury and the players' bodies just literally slowing down and breaking down. George Springer was playing hurt. Jose Altuve was playing hurt. It was running rampant, because you go as deep as you did in 2017, and then you have all the off season, what is left of an off season, and all the travel, and they want you to do the TV shows, and it's nonstop, and maybe they have a couple of weeks for a vacation, and all of a sudden it's early February, and players are getting, they're working out the stadium, then they're going to Florida, and it starts all over again. And we have a real good team that plays well and starts replicating what they did the season before, and they're going full force. By the time you get to the postseason, it sometimes catches up to you, because you've just been going nonstop for a year and a half, and that's what happens. And the Boston Red Sox, they were out in the first round back in 2017, so they didn't have the same type of experience that the Astros had. And I'm not saying that that's an excuse or anything, but that is something that is a reality that happens with teams, and that's why sometimes you see the real good team go out early. Because they've just started to slow down. Yeah, it builds up.
It absolutely adds up. And it always shocks me when guys can actually go through all that and then play winter ball and then go right back into it. I mean, it's funny. We were talking to Louis Tiant the other day, and played 22 years. 19 of those years he played in winter ball, which is insane to me. And he would still throw like 200 pitches, and he's a madman as it is. Yeah. But I mean, it's just, that's unheard of today. I mean, especially because of the investments these teams make in these players. I mean,
sure.
Imagine if Verlander, even though he has a new elbow now, if he wanted to go pitch in Venezuela in the winter, they'd say you're insane.
What are you doing? Yeah. What are you doing?
Are you insane? No.
Yeah. Go hang out with your wife.
Yeah, really. Honestly.
Well, Mike, there are a couple of things I wanted to touch on with you today. One of them was, is there a sense of vindication around the organization? Because regardless of what happened a couple of years ago, this whole cheating nonsense, which frankly, I don't think they cheated. I think that they were just doing what everybody else was doing. And you know what? They had an opportunity, they saw it, and then they changed the rules. Okay, fine. But they keep winning. They lose guys, they keep winning. And this goes back to having smart baseball people. And Chris, you and I have talked about the smart baseball thing, people thing a lot, that they're still winning. So you can say what you want about whatever happened 5 years ago. They're still winning. And they're still one of the best teams in baseball. So is there a sense of vindication around the organization?
I think that, I think that it really doesn't play in the minds of a lot of people anymore on a daily basis. I think what the organization is focused on is what's right there in front of them. And, you know, whatever is thrown at them from the outside or whatever, that's just part of the game now, you know, and that's just another aspect that comes into play. You know, they know that they're going to get razzed in certain stadiums more than others, or in spring training or whatever. But the fact that they are winning, had it been different, if say in 2020, when, you know, that season was so different anyway, you know, it was almost like just like a spring training.
It was
really.
like a weird extended spring training, exactly.
Yeah,
and then
the game,
like a tournament. Like it was like a weird.
Yeah, it was like a weird tournament for a few months. And now had they not played well that season, even under that type of environment, and then, you know, they had some troubles going into the 21. Then it would have been more apparent that, like, you know, there's a bigger shadow on the franchise, and they're reaping what they sow, and they're getting what they deserve now. But I think with the Houston franchise is they're always focused on winning, and always focused on what's in front of them, what's ahead of them, and just really staying focused on that. And the Astros have, over the past few years, have purchased all of their minor league affiliates. So they own the Sugarland Space Cowboys, Fayetteville Woodpeckers, and the Corpus Christi Hooks. And they own all those organizations. And so from top to bottom, they can kind of create a system in place as to how these ball players come through, how they're essentially raised and learning a certain way, so that by the time that they get to Houston and they're playing with Jose Altuve or an Alex Bregman or whatever, they can somewhat make a better adjustment because they have a winning mentality. You know, I can't express that enough, that in 2017, what really culminated there, I used to come home at night, you know, late, and I would tell my wife, and I was like, man, these guys, they just can't see a way to lose. Every night they see a way to win. And even if they're down, they're working so well together. I saw it in situations where, you know, Carlos Correa or Jose Altuve or George Springer, you know, any one of those guys, Yuli Gurriel, but Bregman, you know, if they were in a scenario where they were down to the last inning or whatever it was, and they had a comeback, they got a man on base, they were talking to each other right there. And I mean, they were focused, they were locked in. It was noisy, even at Dodger Stadium too, like in the World Series, they were just locked in. These guys, I saw them say, you do this, hey, come here, you do this, and this is what we're going to do. And most of the time it happened. You know, of course, you got those games where it didn't work out, right? You lose a game, right? You're going to lose. But more often than not, it worked. And so I think that mentality, having a winning attitude, you know, having what's right there in front of you, focused very heavily on that, I think that allows the franchise to kind of move past some of this stuff. And two, with the turnover that's happened, you know, with the general manager and the manager, with James Click and Dusty Baker, that's kind of evolved that too. And those are guys who have winning minds and winning mentalities, and they're able to kind of lock into that same train of mind. And then you have turnover with the players too. But at the same time, you still kind of have that core there, you know, where you still have Altuve, you have Bregman, even though Springer has left and Correa has left. You have, that's why a guy like Jeremy Pena is able to come up and do. He's doing really well in the minors, and then he comes up and is able to really kind of mesh into what they're doing at the major league level, because that's kind of the environment that is elsewhere too.
Yeah, I mean, it
So
comes
that
down to
really
player,
helps the franchise.
yeah,
Yeah,
it comes down to player
it's a real
development.
good player.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, Houston after 2017, the Houston franchise really invested into their player development even more. I mean, I remember after 17, they completely reconstructed the top floor at Union Station to add more room, to bring in more baseball people, to, you know, from all over the place and from other teams and what have you. And so they got really, really focused, and the whole point was to have a sustainability in winning. You know, I remember being in these meetings back in 2011, 2012, and you know, we were going through the losing seasons, and you know, we had organizational meetings, and you know, the owner was there, general manager was there, and we were talking about the scenario we were trying to fight through. And the goal was to get to the World Series, win it, and then have a sustainability that's in place with the franchise, so you can still play well. They anticipated, now behind the scenes, they anticipated that we were going to lose some players. And so how do you sustain that? And that was through player development and then key trades, free agent signings here and there.
Oh, sure.
But throwing money to players is not going to guarantee you a winning ball club. And, you know, we've seen examples of that everywhere. It's more of how you organize your system and what is the
like with
mentality.
the Yankees.
Yeah, the Yankees have traditionally been a team. They go out and they try to get what they can, and they
do.
You know,
I know, and it doesn't always work. Believe me, I know. I know better than anyone that it rarely works. I mean,
and you know what? We'll see that with the Mets this year. So
I was just going to say that. I mean, you guys kind of you know, out Yankees the Yankees this year with one of those.
Mike, let me ask you this. You know, being in New York, guys like Judge and Alonso, the buzz around them supersedes baseball. You know, it goes beyond what's happening on the field. Is that what's happening with Alvarez and guys like Siri? Is the city aware of these guys, or is it just the baseball fans that are aware of these guys?
I would say the city. Well, let's say this: the Astros fan base has transcended a lot, and it really began in 03, 04. When Clemens and Pettit came to town and really kind of elevated the mindset of Astro fans that we belong in the postseason, that these guys, you know, along with the core that we have, they started thinking different. And that continued, you know, like in those losing years, they expected a lot more. They were a lot more critical of the team than they ever had been. It seemed like the fan base got even smarter than what they were, because, you know, there was a lot of disappointment in the years, right? With almost getting there and not quite doing it. No, so the Astro fans, you go around Houston and you see people wearing the Space City jersey and the City Connect jersey, and they're very proud of it. And you see signs, you see art, you know, like graffiti art on street corners, and you know, I mean, it's not like illegal work, but you know, they're commissioning things around the city. Yeah, they're doing these murals and what have you. No, people really know who these guys are. People love Jeremy Pena. They love Yordan Alvarez, and they love the fact, and everybody seems to love the fact and know where he came from the Dodgers. And so, you know, they like throwing that back. Yeah, they love that a lot more than what he's actually doing, I think. So no, they are well aware. And around Houston, you're not only seeing the Altuve jerseys or the Bregman jerseys, you are seeing McCullers, you see Alvarez jerseys, you see Gurriel jerseys. It's like they're able to sell because the fan base is so well versed. They're able to sell not just 3 or 4 jerseys, but you know, almost the entire lineup.
Sure.
Well, what do you think? So I'm glad you mentioned those City Connect jerseys. So many of them are horrible.
I like the Houston ones though.
The Red Sox one is a nightmare.
That's a strange one.
The Dodger ones are a nightmare.
I like Miami's as well.
Miami's are good. The White Sox ones are a nightmare.
Yeah.
How has the reception been for these?
Oh, they love them, and there's people wearing them everywhere. I was out with my hat, this hat, and people were freaking out, you know, right after it came out. So the City Connect project came about a couple years ago, going on 3 years ago now, and we were originally supposed to introduce, at least, or Major League Baseball was originally supposed to introduce at least in stages, or whether it was going to be league wide. It was going to come out in 20. But of course, with the mess and everything else that happened, there was just no reason to do it. So it got shelved, and they were saying, okay, we'll do it for 21. Okay, we anticipate there's going to be fans back, and we'll be able to really push this out like normal. But we did proceed. I was part of that project. We did proceed with moving forward on City Connect. And I remember, as historian of the club and really working on these projects before, I brought along the Astros Hall of Fame, and I had worked on another uniform project when we introduced an alternate uniform in 2016. That was something I worked on for about a year and a half. That was very well received. When we had an opportunity to do City Connect, I immediately thought of the NBA, because they had done something like that.
Sure.
And I wasn't really impressed by it. It was okay.
The NBA jerseys aren't all that great either.
Yeah, they were. It was. I understood kind of what they were trying to do, but I feel that in Houston we really put a real good thought process to what it was, and so I did. I took a stab at it. They asked me, "Hey, do you want to take a stab at what do you think City Connect should look like?" And I said, sure. So I did some Photoshop. I took some images from the games, and I made some recommendations and showed them in some meetings. And I said, I think this is what we should do. And I'll go over them with you right now. One of them was, we should not use a white jersey because we don't want to detract anything from our home white uniform. And in Houston, the home whites are very important because that is your primary uniform. So we don't want anything to compete with our traditional home whites. Let's use a solid color. People have really loved the orange. People have really loved the navy alternate that we have. So let's go with maybe one of those colors and do a different variation of it. Second of all, I said, let's not use the word Astros on the front, and let's use something like H-Town or Space City or something else that Houston is kind of known for as a nickname. The other aspect was, let's use the NASA warm font that you see on the rockets, which is essentially this. And so I put that, and I put the player names on the back, and I put the names on the front in that warm font, and then I added an orbit around, and you can see the orbit made it, but it was on the hat instead of on the word mark on the front of the jersey. So I put these together. And then the other aspect was, let's utilize the rainbow colors of the Astros. Now, we have those rainbow uniforms, and I had already been talking about how the rainbow uniform was really part of the DNA of the Houston franchise. It had really become it transcended generations, and it really become an identity of the Astros. Even with the uniform changes where we didn't have the rainbow uniforms, people were still wearing rainbow uniforms to the Astro games, and they wanted us to go back. So it's in the DNA of the franchise, much like the pinstripes are with the Yankees. So I said, well, let's use the rainbow colors, but instead of using stripes, let's use a gradient. And so I did a rendering where it was like it faded from orange to yellow, and you have red and in there too. And so I had put that I had actually, for the gradient, I had put it in an example of the letters along the front of the uniform. So I did about, I don't know, about 3 or 4 little renderings, and I brought them into the meeting, and then that got taken into some bigger meetings, and then eventually we started seeing the art that came back from Nike, and lo and behold, all of those little design elements made it in there. But then Nike was introducing some other ideas too, so they kept all of those things. So I felt really good about that, because everybody in the organization seemed to like it, and Nike seemed to not push back on it. Nike is very, very opinionated and also dominating. They really want to say how the teams wear their uniforms and what they wear, what they don't want to produce for the teams, and Nike was receptive to this, and all of these design elements stayed in there because I think they made sense. I mean, when it came down to it, they made sense. They connected with the city, and they introduced some other things. One of the things that they brought along was, if you see on the sleeve here, this grid system here, which is like in mission control, you have the flight path of a spacecraft, and that's what the back part of the grid looks like. And then you have a mission patch. They put a mission patch on there. And you can see the gradient was used in the piping on the uniform.
I didn't notice that one.
Yeah. So the rainbow colors are right here, and then in the design of the outline. Yeah. So the gradient made it in there in different aspects, but I really liked it, and I saw it in a graphic. And of course, just like in any type of logo design or rebrand, if teams are going, and this applies to really not just in sports, but really anywhere. We had a version that was kind of similar to what we were doing already, and then there was a version that was kind of more futuristic looking, something that was a little bit more out there. And then there was one that was just really crazy, and it's just like there was something like I remember at one time I think the grid was on the entire uniform, the pants. Ooh. And and it looked like a bad pantsuit that Judge Smails and Caddyshack would have worn,
70s jumpsuit or something like that. That's rough.
It just looked horrible. But again, I think sometimes you need to see that, and organizations need to have that in front of them, so that doesn't work, and that's not what you want. You need to see it, and instead of just going, oh, maybe we should have done it. You need to go through that and see that. So in the end, the uniform came in, I want to say in the early spring. I think it was May or sometime in early June of 20. And then the hat came in, the pants came in, and it got passed around just to the people that were kind of helping on that project, and just getting some opinions of what the physical uniform looked like after we had seen it in graphical form. And we really liked it, and it was exciting, but it was also because of what was going on in the world and the way baseball was being played at that point, it was also hard to not talk about it. I mean,
I would assume that's the hardest thing. You don't want to be the guy who leaked it or anything, but I mean, especially when it's something you worked on and you're really excited about it, is trying to keep that under your hat, really, to say it.
And nobody took pictures of it, right? So we didn't want to have any type of mishap, with that leak or anything. So it was, I was excited, and of course, I was laid off in 21, right before the season. So I didn't see the project carried to the unveiling, but I was really proud of it because it was one of the last major projects that I got to work on, and I think it worked. And when it came out, everybody was so excited. I mean, the lines around Minute Maid Park, people were just standing in line for hours to get it.
Wow.
And I just, and some of the other City Connect uniforms, I don't like to really get down on them a lot, but it just seems like some of the other ones maybe didn't have the same creativity or thought process behind them. I understand the symbolism of them, but sometimes and organizations are different from each other. They put different emphasis on different things, and I mean, I just think ours was one of the better ones.
The Dodger one is terrible. Chris, you're out in California. The Dodger one is terrible.
I mean, it didn't look much different. It looked kind of like a softball team to me.
Yeah, and the White Sox one the White Sox one looks like it's a pimp outfit.
The White Sox one was that almost reminded me of pajamas in a weird way.
Now, I didn't mind the Yankees.
I can't wait to see what the outrage is going to be when the Yankees finally come out with one. Because
they never will. But I think the Angel one was okay,
people are just going to go ballistic.
Chris, what did people out there think of the Angel one? Because I think the Angel one was okay.
I saw photos of it, and then I actually watched the game where they were wearing it, and I thought they looked really good. Pretty simple, very like old surfy. I actually like the Angels ones.
Well, it also helped. I think Trout, that was an ESPN game, and Trout was on camera talking about how much he loved them.
Oh yeah.
So I think that helps.
And they also hit something like 4 or 5 home runs that night.
Yeah.
So
that's
a good way to sell some merch. That's for sure.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what you want too. And I'm sure that Trout was probably say, hey, could you mention them? Could you say something?
Oh, I'm sure.
That way we can get a little movement on them. And he probably, knowing the guy, I don't know if you've ever met Mike Trout before, but he's a really nice guy, and he's a really good guy. And I can see him go, yeah, whatever you need, I'll do it for you, because I think he believes in that organization. He is really nice. He hit his
Shame
100th
he's got
career
to
home
spend
run.
his career in Anaheim, but
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah. No, he's a good dude. We got to work with him when he hit his 100th career homer in
Oh,
Houston,
cool.
and so we were authenticating all his stuff. And just a real nice guy. He really understands the bigger picture in baseball.